Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. In this episode of the podcast, I'm chatting with Molly Holzschlag. Molly has been involved with the web since its very beginning. She's been described as the fairy godmother of the World Wide Web, as a web standards queen. I've heard the word matriarch used as well. She's an author, a teacher, an open web evangelist. Her book, Web by Design, was one of the reasons why I personally became interested in building for the web. Molly, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our little podcast.
Ivan and Jonathan, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm a little giddy, so let's.
Don't be so silly.
Well, I don't know. This book was seminal in my desire to build for the web, and TEN7 started kind of 10 years later. So the reason why this company exists is kind of traced back to Web by Design. Even like.
That's a very profound thing to hear. I hear that from people sometimes. And it's, what is more gratifying to a human being than knowing the work you did helped people? Right? I'm really happy to hear that. So thank you. I'm the one who's honored.
Well, it was certainly the beginning of something, and it was wonderful. With my little ZX Spectrum, when I started coding, even before that, I never knew I'd be starting a business. So we're lucky to have done that. I want to go back and start with your initial involvement in the web. I read that you wrote a tiny little thesis that was called A Brave New World Wide Web.
This is true.
What motivated you to write that?
Well, I was studying media studies at the New School for Social Research. It was an online program, and I was with Dr. Paul Levinson, who is known as the father of online education in terms of originating technical education in the digital format pre-web. So this is even pre-web, using BBSs and any kind of internet technology. Amazing time of life to be alive, right? BBS. So it just so happened that my interests, intersected in that moment that the web rose. And I was doing my thesis on a BBS, right? But this of course, I don't know if you know about New School. New School is quite famous. It's the umbrella school where Parsons School of Design, Emerson College, different colleges, Parsons School of Design, yeah, and Emerson is, I think, economics school. They have a lot of different schools, and the media studies department there for the master's program is typically known as a feeder program for the MIT Media Lab. So it was a natural kind of course, but nobody knew what the web was going to be or going to become. So I was just in the right place at the right time and with the right set of interests, and it seemed to just coalesce. And then, of course, there were quite a few books before Web by Design. That was by no means my first book, but it was the first book, I think, that brought a lot of the, you can go back to that book, and while you would still have to throw out some of the HTML because we've advanced, or some of the techniques because we've advanced so much, there's fundamental knowledge in there that will always remain true. So I feel very proud of that particular book. And so it makes me especially happy knowing not only did you find it and it helped you, but you found it in Johannesburg, no less, and that it's truly the World Wide Web. We really do live in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, it's amazing that it had that kind of reach. And it was truly a holistic book as well. I was looking through it again this weekend, and there are mentions of accessibility in it. It's almost as if we designed websites and interfaces that by design we had to use text back then, but they were more accessible, right?
So for me, the challenge that I came out of a linguistics background, media studies, computational sciences. So everything I was looking at was like, what is the meaning of things, right? And I think that was natural to the web. We were not interested in spinning globes and fiery skulls, and at that point in the history, although that's what began to happen. The more power we got, the more speed we got, the more fun we have had, and the more exploration has gone on. And of course, we've made a big mess in all of that kerfuffle. But I think when we go back, that's the point of all of this, is that there was an agenda, and there is a clear separation as well as integration. It is both a separate and integrated construct. And I think if we have to remind ourselves that all the time, and we're not really doing a good job at that, in my opinion, in the industry right now, especially where you get a lot of people just coming out with just doing JavaScript to generate HTML and not thinking about that extra step of accessibility, for example, or having to do it after they've already built the application or the website and tacking it on and it being a big kerfuffle, right? So ideologically, it proves that we already were on a path that made sense. And now we kind of got off the beaten path because we were playing in a sandbox, and that was necessary, I think, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think you hit on a very important point. You described the afterthought that accessibility is, or the line item that it seems to be these days. And that's not how I think of it. It's not how TEN7 likes to approach things. I feel very strongly that it should be everyone's task, everyone's responsibility on the team, our clients, our writers, our designers, our developers, to be thinking about accessibility as a natural part of our process. It shouldn't be a line like a...
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. You're giving me goosebumps. Because seriously, because that is what is more simple than saying build and architect properly with your tools. I mean, we didn't have those tools, and then we also put barriers in front of those tools, with browsers, and made it even harder. So for a moment when the web was just a text-based world, I had a lot of blind friends who were able to interact for the first time with the internet and network, and then suddenly, wham, 2 years later, you've got spinning backgrounds and nobody can get to, in that particular demographic, could get to what they had opened up. So it's very frustrating for a person who also came to the web because of health issues and needing that adaptive. It was there, and it was also adaptive to my life and my life's needs, which were to work from home a lot due to medical circumstances. So that gave me the opportunity to be involved in this really cool thing. And, when I got better and better years, was able to come on out and meet people and travel the world, and then have the World Wide Web experience as a person moving through the people of the World Wide Web. And so I think it gives me I feel fortunate, and I wish that sometimes I could just, teach a masterclass on that original concept from Web by Design, of where you have these individual parts, and you have to respect them as individual parts, but you also have to understand that, like human beings, just a hand is not a head, and one is not the other. So we have, and how that cascades, and we look at our various interacting technology, how the CSS works with the markup, works with the content, works with the scripting. All of that has to be taken into account, and the accessibility is simply part of a good quality user experience. End of story.
Period.
Yes. So if you want to make quality software, quality applications, quality websites, that has to be part of the process. It isn't something you slap on afterwards. That's like ramshackle house building.
That's exactly what it is. It's like forgetting that the people that are using your software are actually humans, and that they have certain kinds of issues. And
it goes even worse than that. I'll one up you on it. It assumes that they have no lives and nobody in their lives that they want to buy things for, or care about, or use or make trips, or do the things that everyday people do.
Exactly.
It's a dehumanization of an entire population. Very upsetting to me.
Very upsetting to me as well.
Web is supposed to be a unification, not this division.
Now, you mentioned you used some adaptive technologies early on, that your initial interaction was when you were ill. Now,
Yeah.
what was that adaptive technology like back then? Is it similar or different, or how's it changed?
Well, adaptive technology itself, I mean, this is a very, very big ocean to swim in, because we have all kinds of mechanical adaptations, and we also have physical adaptations, and we also have adaptations we can add to the browser or to our markup, or in our, like with Way Aria, with language. So there are so many ways to come at what an adaptive technology means, that it's a very big, complicated area. But for me personally, it was that I was isolated, and it gave me a door to the world. And that kept me interested, engaged, and I was able, in fact, getting my master's online was because I was unable to leave the house, right? So there I was getting a master's in basically artificial intelligence and intentional intelligence, and getting ready to move toward that MIT Media Lab kind of model that I was after, I guess, in my own plan, right? You write the plan and then life goes its own way.
You iterate, right? You iterate. Yeah. That's what you have to do.
You have to be adaptive,
Exactly.
Adaptation is everything. So I think that that's really where, I got those values because I lived through it, and I saw what benefits opened up for me, what benefits opened up for friends. Like I was just saying, my blind, I have he was a blind professor for I forget which university in upstate New York, a very good university. And he was way advanced in IT. He was teaching IT, for heaven's sake. And, it's like when the web came along, he was able to do so many things he couldn't have done before, but it was because it was text, and it involved just a simple speech reader. So there was, a mechanical device.
Oh,
right. And that would interpret the screen. But now the screen has become so abstract, right? And this is why that word holistic, which is kind of a little new agey for these days, I would say, but it does touch on what you are saying about that original ideology and how you build your company, to address and acknowledge all sides of the quality assurance of a product or a project.
So I think of you as an author, but I think of you as a teacher as well. You've written millions, zillions, countless books. I know you've had lynda.com series. You feel like an educator. You feel like someone who's a proponent of knowledge and open technologies. Why did you become a teacher?
That's a really good question. I think it's because I'm a lifelong learner, and it's just it's more fun when, if I learn something and I get to share it with the next kid in the sandbox, and they get to share their tricks with me, and then we have more tricks. I think there's just a natural, it's just a natural curiosity and an extroversion. I also come from a long line of teachers, so there are a lot of educators in my family. There's a great value for education. I used to joke, my mother, she would measure life by degrees. That was my joke. I was like, how many degrees do they have? If they have enough degrees, then they're a human being. It's like, why don't you have your PhD? I'm like, there's no PhD for web development. So yeah, I think it's pretty much part of the personality and the way in which I was raised, and the sincere environment or the sincere desire to really make a difference with the technology that is fundamentally human and created as a declarative, language to make it accessible. And I don't mean this in the A11Y accessibility sense, but accessible to all human beings, right?
Available.
Yes, available, right? No boundaries, no borders, no BS in the way between me and the thing I want to do. And of course, we see that being co-opted now in our time with the Netflix and the digital media DM. And so it becomes a big political thing. And you end up with this whole net neutrality, and we end up in a time where we're dealing with those middlemen trying to come in because we've got critical mass of people and money utilizing those facilities. So of course the middlemen want in the capitalist mentality, right? They want their piece of the pie. So we're in a political time, I think, too, that has disrupted the way that a developer works. And accessibility often gets lost in that because of the push to make it all visual, because of the push to make it like TV, and it's like, it can be used that way. Why can't we do both? I mean, why can't it be all? It is all those things.
It is. What I struggle to understand is if you frame the discussion from a capitalist mentality where people are developing and going towards the markets where it's visual and where you're relying on the graphic nature of the web, and you're relying on the commerce that results from the web, why aren't those capitalists being reminded that 20% of that web isn't going to see any of that there is 1/5 of the population simply isn't going to be able to access that information that you're trying to sell? Like, why wouldn't you use that as a motivator? It doesn't feel like that's been talked about.
I have definitely, when working with the Web Standards Project and with Nobility.org, a tremendous group moving and constantly educating on this very, very subject, both technically as well as socially. So definitely for listeners, I would totally recommend, if they haven't checked out Nobility with KNOWBILITY.org, nobility.org. I used to work there, and they're a nonprofit out of Austin. And that's part of the agenda, is really to try and work with anybody, whether small, independent, or very large, companies like Netflix or what have you, to remind them of this and to remind them of the reality that this is part of quality, and it isn't about a percentage or that doesn't matter to their demographic, which is an insult and totally dehumanizing. And I have a real problem with it, So I think that we definitely have made efforts, and some companies have shown flex. A great, there's a bad pun in there, but I'm going to leave it alone. The one company I see really taking that forward, I think, is Microsoft. Their accessibility group has really woken up. I mean, they got the message. We did great work with Web Standards Project, with people inside Microsoft itself. It was a concerted effort. It was one of the most amazing and scary times of my life, going through this whole Bill Gates thing, and everything, and working with people who were really cutthroat. I mean, it was a war room. That when you say war room at the computer lab, that was a war room. There was a war going on, and we made great strides. So in some cases, we have to say, not everybody's so, like Gates got it in the end, which is pretty amazing. And Apple, to its credit, has always had, at least if it hasn't done much in terms of contributions to the broad spectrum of technology on the web, of course, the World Wide Web Consortium, Apple is there and involved in making the standards. So they are participatory, and so there are ways in.
So what's fascinated me is this 180 degree that Microsoft has taken, and how focused they were on proprietary technology, but yet still they used the web. You were involved there in as a community manager, I think. And
I have a long history with jobs at Microsoft, yeah. But I left it with two meetings with Bill Gates, mix and mashes, like a full. They were basically invite thought leaders from the various parts of the industry and in for guidance for the content of their upcoming mixed conferences, which they don't do anymore, right? No. So that was the mixed conference was really during the rise of a lot of the .NET technologies when they moved out of ASP and into .NET and all of that. And so that became really important. And then we had the IE6 problem. So the IE6 problem became the big fight of my career, right? And getting to Bill Gates and being, invited back again, to argue through that. That took a huge amount of internal. You can only imagine what must be going on behind the scenes in order to have opened up somebody's mind, a leader's mind like that, to even open up the possibility to other technologists and open activists to come in and talk to him. And I think that made a big difference. Jonathan Snook was there. I mean, a lot of people. You take a look at those two meetings, and there were a lot of influential people from very different parts of the web and web media and technical world. And I think along with that, there were people whispering in his ear to do the right thing, So he got it. He transformed. And he transformed his company, I think.
And I think and it's transformed in a positive way and for the benefit of the greater population. Now, whether or not that can happen with other companies currently in our discourse that have closed systems, that have proprietary technologies, that have been taking advantage of data of humans with
Analytica
and so on. Can it happen with Facebook, for example? Are they able to make a 180?
I don't know. They shouldn't have had to. I mean, their raison d'etre, their reason for being still has relevance. I go on Facebook to have conversations with friends and people of both like-minded and not like-mindedness, because I'm interested in the world and it's truly a social interface for me. Okay, so I still use it as that. But there are other people using it and co-opting Facebook and Twitter. And, obviously our Twitter has been co-opted, and features. This is what drives me nuts. They're adding features like specifically for a certain tweeter whose name I shall not mention. And this is like, you don't serve the one, you serve the many.
The many. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, come on, we're nerds. We know this stuff. It's our creed, right? It's not for the one, or the few, only for the many.
Only for the many.
We have to really remember our roots as technologists, as open-mindedness. But I think the problem is we're also seeing a lot of people come into the industry that have no clue that was its reason for being.
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem too, is that they just see another utility to take advantage of economically.
Exactly. And the only way we can change that is by education. We have to remind people what the web was, what the web originally was supposed to be, remind people of what the experiences are that others in the industry have had. I was a student in a university on the southern tip of Africa, and I had access to the internet just like everybody else had in the United States and in Europe. And I was able to download Red Hat and play with Linux. And
learn open and learn real source code and learn how to.
Exactly.
And you're probably pretty young doing this too, I bet.
I was pretty young. So one of the things I struggle with is, how do I reconcile the open source aspirations that TEN7 has, for example? We build on Drupal. We support our open source community. We do everything so that our clients can be empowered. How do we reconcile that with my own use of Mac OS and of iOS and Facebook and Twitter? And
what a wonderful question. That is a wonderful question. I have the same, chronic ruminations about it because I'm sitting here with a Macintosh. I've got a Linux box in the other room, and I've got a window box over there. But, it's like the reality is that the MacBook Pro specifically was the best choice for the job I needed to get done. Yeah. So I think we have to look at it like this. We have a tendency, we as humans tend to look only within our lives and only what's right in front of us. And I think we have to get very meta on life's ass. And basically what you've got to do is you've got to really see beyond that. And understand that nothing comes without a tinge of evil. I mean, it's like when you go to buy a car, I thought, okay, well, I don't want to contribute to the legacy of, let's say, Mercedes-Benz and those who contributed to building ovens in the Holocaust. All right. So that was an ethic I grew up with. Right. But now you've got so many, crossovers and mashups of companies. You don't know who's involved.
There's almost zero purity in the ownership.
Or we see this in the behavior of people. Look at how many of our idols are being accused of groping and inappropriate behavior, and they're acting like children, when I thought that was just my right. Nobody else is allowed to do that. No tantrums in public, right? And I mean, we see this ridiculousness of what's supposed to be leadership and adulthood, and it's not happening for us as a race. So I think we have to just kind of remember that it's like a Woody Allen situation. It's like, just because he was a sleazebag, does that mean he wasn't funny?
He was funny.
He was funny. So, I mean, or, he also plays the saxophone. He's a talented man. Does it mean he's not talented? But it's also, you have to be inclusive. I think this is a new level of inclusivity. We have to recognize that people are weird and strange. And the more we open that up, the more weird and strange stuff comes out.
Yeah.
And in a way, maybe that's a good thing for society. In a way, maybe this pendulum swinging towards such divisive, nationalistic rise across the world is a part of the last gasp of the generation. If we look beyond that, if we survive it. Yeah,
maybe it is. It feels like the whole world is
because you've got a president tweeting every thought. It's amazing to me. That's a powerful value for people. So let's use that.
Yeah, it feels like the whole world has become anti-globalization, almost as if it's against itself. And it feels like the pendulum has swung so far that it's either going to continue to swing and it's going to go right around and we won't make it, or it'll start swinging back.
Exactly.
And it'll be the last time it gets that far.
I don't know. I mean, I've come to, at this point in my life, I have to sit and think. And I wonder, will humans socially evolve beyond this point? Because we do day to day get along. I live in a senior, rehabilitation center because of, again, long-term life medical problems. And it's real interesting because we have an exact split of African-American and so anti-current regime and pro-current regime. So you've got an exact split, like with just a little bit of diversity on the edges. And what's fascinating is it's very peaceful. Nobody argues with each other. We have barbecues and they do things socially, and you just don't talk about it.
Avoidance.
If you do, you step out and you yell. But nobody. We don't have fist fights. Nobody's hitting each other over here. We're not taking out our 22s and whatever and then firing at each other. We're living next door to each other like adults. Yeah. That's humanity. We can still choose to do that.
I agree. That's community. That's being you're concerned about your fellow citizen, and you get along on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Even if you hate the platform they stand on, you don't dehumanize them. They're still people. So that's a democracy. That's an open world. That's a live and let live kind of take on things. And I think the World Wide Web, what we've done is we're starting to recognize the world in World Wide Web. We did a lot of work on the web part. We don't know much about the wide yet. And that's what I'm kind of getting at now is we have to go real wide with our thinking and stop thinking just beyond. It's not like when you build a website, it's not like in 9 months you ship the baby, right?
Yeah.
That baby's going to have to be fed and cared for and nourished for the rest of its life.
And it changes and it evolves and you iterate. It's not something you deliver. It's something you continue to maintain.
Exactly. There's a lot of work involved. So you don't just ship the baby in this digital world that we work in. You can't do that. And if you do think that way, that is it's a very short-minded way of thinking about a tool that has endless potential for humanity.
Endless potential,
yes.
especially if there are standards around the potential, and everybody can work with each other in the same language, because that's what we're interested in.
Really nice if we could have that.
Talking to each other.
Yes, I would love to see that. I felt that we had that in our community at one time. There was a much stronger, but it was smaller. We've come to such a large, the web development, web design, and all of the various related specialties have become enormous. The diversity of professions within the profession are just incredibly...
Experts within the profession, yes.
Yeah, so it's gotten very large. And I think that has taken away from a lot of the intimacy, and now there are cliques. You get the clique thing happening like high school, with people gathering together in like-mindedness. And that's okay. That's a social construct that seems very natural for humans to do. As long as they don't have to pick up a sword to make their point to the other clique, right? Just have a conversation.
And the thing that joins us is perhaps the web, the ideal that the web connects us all, and that we're really just building for the web.
That's what I want it to be. That's what I think Tim Berners-Lee wanted it to be. That's
Absolutely,
what
he did.
Most people who were, yes, it was about sharing of data, which, remember, data does not mean information. Nope. Information does not mean knowledge, and knowledge does not mean wisdom. We have to do stuff with that data to make information and knowledge and wisdom. So that's our job. Okay, we haven't really gotten to that part.
So you were the lead of the Web Standards Project at one time, like in the mid-aughts. And during
the IE6
during the IE6, okay.
IE6 IE8 debacle was my leadership time.
And so I looked up the Web Standards Project, and I thought for sure it would still be around, and we would still, there would be a new leader there, and things are we're still working towards web standards, because I don't feel like we've come to a place where the web standards are,
No, in fact, we've come to a really bad place. We're on the opposite side. We're trying to undo the JavaScript first. I think JavaScript is an amazing language, but time and place for everything, right? You have to know how, if you're going to do JavaScript first development, you have to understand the component parts of the integrated holistic web. Going back to that Web by Design book originally, the accessibility pieces. You have to do your homework. You have to know your HTML5. You have to know your ARIA. You can't do JavaScript-based development without those things if you want a quality product at the end, full stop. Yeah, education is a huge part of that, how to move that forward. Now, with the Web Standards Project...
It dissolved, right?
So what happened is when I got up to the level where I was enjoying the attention of Microsoft and Bill Gates and getting the ear, and where a lot of people were engaged, the entire group was very large at that point. We had task force. We had people working with Adobe, trying to do exactly what you were talking about earlier, about getting to these companies and saying, open it up a bit. Come on, crack it open. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of things, street teams, and things were really happening. And so many good people. Just a list of people that I could, we'd be here for hours just listing names of incredible contributions from our community that went into that. It was no easy task to turn around an entire company's epic, So, we did that. And what happened then is at the point I challenged Gates. He basically hired me as a consultant at that point and then sent me around the world to teach his developers as well as other developers web standards. So I felt at that point that I had to step down as lead because it would be conflict of interest. So I stepped down, and there was a beautiful, they gave me flowers and a big speech at a WASP meeting at South by Southwest one year. And I left. And Aaron Gustafson, Aaron and Kimmy took it over. Kimberly Blessing. They took it over. It kind of lost its way, and they decided that they felt that they had come to a win. So they felt that since that particular problem was resolved, that was the end. And therefore their work was done and they closed shop down. And this was never, I would not have been on that side. I wanted to reignite it. I have always wanted to reignite it, but I don't think that standards are the issue anymore. I think it goes far beyond that. It goes into a broader idea of what standards means, just like a broader idea of what accessibility means. That it also means we must have an ethical standard, a professional standard. You know, there are other standards that we don't have, right? Like you're saying how you, at your company, always bring in everybody at that first meeting, right? You've got all of the people on board from day one,
right?
Day one development kind of a process, and that is a very strong process, right? That way, you've got the voices representing those areas of skill sets necessary. When you don't have that, you really end up having to do the patchwork, and the patchwork never works. We all know that. You know, I mean, every industry has it. They say, in studio music, they say, we'll fix it in the mix, right? In the movie industry, they say, we'll fix it in post.
Right.
You know, we'll fix it in beta. We never do. We're human beings. We don't do it. Let's just accept the reality of our flaws and work with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of technical debt for the world, right? It's like we'll fix it tomorrow. No,
exactly.
We won't.
Yeah, fix it in the mix, fix it in beta. I mean, it's the mantra of humanity. So I think that it's okay that we shouldn't be ashamed of that. It's all right to embrace that and say, okay, because human beings are like this, now let's have a plan. So that we don't make the mistake of letting that hole go, because then you let that hole go and then the next hole goes and suddenly you have a Cambridge Analytica Facebook situation on your hands.
Let's not go down that route.
Right. How do you think one got to the other? Because of all the holes in the security that we could have had.
Yeah.
And should have had the whole time. And it's there. It's not that the technology doesn't exist. It's that we'll put it there later. We'll fix it in the mix. We'll add it in beta. No. Fix it now.
Fix it now. Now, earlier in the podcast, you said that no one really knew what the web would become when we first worked with the web. Is there a technology you feel the same way about right now?
The project itself is no longer active, but that would be the Human Genome Project, I think, was doing that. I think there's an analogy to be said for photography, especially for people doing not just digital anymore, people going back to older school styles and forms. There is an analogy there. There are analogies, yes, but not a lot. We are great. We don't realize the value we have for human evolutionary breakthrough with the web, because the web enables us and empowers us as an assistive device simply by holding information that we can then, the data that becomes the information, that becomes the knowledge, that can become human wisdom, right? But we're just not using it. We haven't been taught. We don't know. It's a cart before the horse situation. That's what I always use as a model. Yeah. And until the horse gets in front of the cart and we kind of get involved in a good communication with the horse, we're not going to be moving in the right direction.
Now, I see you on Twitter. I personally haven't used Twitter as much as I did prior to the 2016 election. I have stopped doing that. I saw you tweet.
People call it media dieting. I'm like, I get it.
I totally get it. Yeah. So I did see you tweet something that I wanted to ask you about, and what you meant by the web will never be interoperable unless we as humans are interoperable.
It's exactly what I meant by what I was saying, how I live in a very divided community, and yet we don't fist fight each other every day. There's not fights breaking out. People are adults here. They go about their life and they socialize together and they live together and they live side by side, and there's no violence and there's no gunslinging when most of the population here owns a gun. Okay, so none of that goes on in a divisive population. Why can't that scale? Why don't we scale that? And I think that's interoperability for humanity, is that we accept the fact that we are all as we are. It's like you mentioned globalism, which is a very dangerous word, and I try to avoid it. So I use the word toward a more international relationship, okay? Because I just want to take the taint off of it. But I think that this is what we have to, that's human interoperability, is understanding how to work with each other, how to live with each other, despite our differences of ideas, of color, of creative class, all of that stuff. So until we're interoperable and willing to accept those divisions and differences, we're not going to have a web that is, right? Our technology reflects us, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it is the other way around too. It's
a weird interplay, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it's both ways. It's you caught me there. Yeah, no, you just expand. You widen my web. You widen my world. But it's true. That's a very good observation, because it does come back. And that said, a lot of people are saying that the Twitter nonsense that we've seen since those elections, and the reason many people have gotten off of there and run away, has a lot to do with the fact that it's disruptive. It's so disruptive. It's not a social haven anymore. It's not the unified web that we had, or the community that we once had when we were a lot smaller. The world really cracked open, and we did that. And we knew we were disrupting. We knew this was disruptive technology. But who knew it was going to disrupt this much and how far it would go? Yeah. We don't know still.
We don't. We really don't.
And I hope that portion that you just brought up, the reflection back of all that negativity onto humanity, I know that mental health workers here, that case workers, because I've been going through testing and whatever, I know that there is a great concern among the population that we are on a constant hypervigilance in the United States, at least, and a lot of parts of the world are beyond that. They're already in active wars, but look at us. We don't know when, where, and how. Any minute, any day, anywhere, somebody's going to lose it and blow a bunch of people away. It happens every single day in this country. It's so you become hypervigilant or you become numb. And when that reflects back on the human being, then I'm very concerned for the future, because you create more sociopaths. I don't want to create more sociopaths.
No, we don't.
Open the world for the heart to open.
Well, I want that too. And maybe one of those things that you could be doing is spending time away from technology to do that, right? I think
that's very important. In fact, that's part of my creed now, is walk away from the computer if you really want to learn computation. If you really want to understand the World Wide Web, go live in the world.
Go and do something. Yes.
Interoperate with another human being.
Love
that
it.
is very different than you. And then we'll have interoperability. Does that make a little more sense?
I think it does. I think it does.
It's a meta concept. It's saying we have to learn to interact with each other. Yeah. And if we can do that, then it would reflect back in the web. But it doesn't, because we can't. We can't even do it with ourselves. We wake up in the morning and play with ourselves, right?
Right.
They're like, no, I don't want green. I'll take the blue shirt. I don't know. We can't make up our own minds. Nobody's driving the bus.
Nobody's driving the bus. It's like a horse in a hospital. I heard a description.
I've never heard that one. That's a good one too.
You should look up John Mulaney. John Mulaney is a comedian. He described the current administration as a horse loose in a hospital.
A horse loose in a hospital. Oh, that is a wonderful anotology.
Nobody asked for a horse in a hospital, but we've got a horse in a hospital.
Godzilla myself, but okay. Horses are. I feel like we're insulting the horses.
Molly, thank you so much for spending your precious time with me.
I have to thank you. I mean, I'm beginning to start feeling like I don't know, you're too young yet, but when you start toward retirement, and you're in a situation where you're looking back on a career as opposed to looking forward or are in the middle of a career, it's a very interesting perspective. And to still be thought of and to still be sought after is a great honor to me and to the work that I hopefully, really did with good intent to humankind and for the web, for good, for humankind's good. the kindness in humans. And that's the important message, I think, that I hope will always live on about Molly,
I think it will.
Yeah.
It certainly resonated with me, and it's created certainly longevity and certainly employment for numerous people associated with TEN7. So I thank you for that as well.
I thank you for that, for passing it along. That's the whole point.
That's the point.
Well done, my friend. Well done. And thank you again so much. It's truly my honor to be recognized at this point in my career still. And I really, hopefully we'll see where things go. But if I do get a little bit of a reprieve after some personal stuff, maybe I'll come back and do a masterclass like that for somebody, like do one, online, or do something like that. I really have wanted to do that for a long time. Like just like things you need to know.
I think you should do that. I think a master class would be a great idea. I think it would be very well accepted. You should consider doing that.
I've had a lot of thought. I've also talked with other people on, contributions, because of course I only know my part, but there's so much, as we've said. But I think that would be a good direction. So that's my hope, but it's not a promise.
We'll see you there. We'll see you when it happens.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Ivan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It was really nice to be here.
Thank you. So you're M. Holzschlag on Twitter. That's MHOLZSCHLAG on Twitter. You've been listening to the TEN7 Podcast. Find us online at ten7.com/podcast. And if you have a second, do send us a message. We love hearing from you. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thank you for listening.